Okay, good morning, everyone. This is Dr. Donna DeBonis with the American Association of Food Safety and Public Health Veterinarians, and I'm doing an interview today with Dr. Kristen Clark, and she is coming to us from Iowa, and she's going to tell us, starting out, with what brought her to veterinary medicine in the first place. Go ahead, Kristen. Good morning.
Good morning. Great to be here. Thank you. So I, like many others, had an interest in veterinary medicine from a young age. I grew up on a farm and was exposed to a lot of animals, but I also had an interest in human health. And although I didn't quite realize how all those things were going to come together for me at the time, I definitely pursued the health avenue in school. And actually, when I originally went to college, went to be a physician's assistant. And then shortly after, during my freshman year, I switched my major to pre-veterinary classes and eventually wound up working in public health. But kind of just that love of science and how diseases spread in society and our world, and just had a natural curiosity to learn more about that and help people and help animals.
So did you start out at Iowa State for your pre-vet?
I did not. I actually, and I don't share this with everyone, I went to our rival institution. So I started at the University of Iowa, despite being a Cyclone fan. And that's where the Hawkeyes are from, for anyone who pays attention to that, but we have a pretty big rivalry. So I actually started my undergraduate studies there. They have a medical college and a physician's assistant track that you can take. But then I ended up transferring to Iowa State my junior year of undergrad and finished my undergraduate degree there, and then went on to go to vet school at Iowa State as well. So I did spend some time at our rival institution, but I will say it was a good experience. I really got that human health aspect there, and I was my part-time job while I was at that college was at the University of Iowa Hospitals and Clinics as a research assistant in the heart failure and heart transplant unit. So I certainly learned a lot of things that I carried over to my veterinary and public health career. So.
Yeah, it's interesting. I remember when I was doing my interviews for getting into vet school, they were so concerned with all of your animal experience.
Mm-hmm.
And how were you able to, I don't know, perhaps convince them that your human health experience was relevant and important?
Sure. Yeah. So I think when you can help people to see that really a lot of those basic components of diseases and how they spread and health impacts, but also, for example, the research component, the general premises of how you conduct research and look at data and data management, those all carry over from both human health and animal health. So another thing, I was a certified nursing assistant when I was in high school. That was my part-time job. That was where I got introduced to medical terminology. So I was responsible for keeping records on our residents at the local nursing home where I worked. And it really, at the time, again, I didn't realize how useful that was going to be to me later, but it made it a lot easier. When I entered the veterinary field, I had that background already of keeping medical records and how important it was to document things, and that kind of introduction to medical terminology. So I think it's just, there's so many commonalities, and those of us who work in the field just understand that, but to a lot of folks who aren't familiar with veterinary medicine and all the different ways that our human, environmental, and animal health tie together, it can be hard to see that from the outset, but there really are just a lot of commonalities between the practice of science and health and healthcare, and how we all go about doing our jobs.
So is that along the lines of the buzzword One Health?
Yes, I would definitely say so. I think, and I probably still have this conversation on almost a weekly basis, but frequently when I tell people what I do for a living, and I also tell them that I'm a veterinarian, they say, oh, well, why didn't you want to be a veterinarian anymore? Now you work in human public health. To me, those are all one and the same. And so it's just that aspect of the way, we're all interconnected, and I'm speaking to the choir here, but we're all interconnected. And when one thing is impacted, the other is impacted. And again, there's just so many commonalities, and then we can all put our expertise together. Certainly not one of us can know everything, but we all know something. And so when we can bring all that knowledge together, we're so much more powerful in the work that we do, that can be translated for really any species in our environment as well. So it's all about that kind of ecological perspective of being able to see how things relate and one thing impacts another. So
yeah, I think perhaps indigenous populations understand that the best.
Yes. Yep.
Since they have to live in harmony and
Yep.
utilize resources in a sustainable way. So yep. I do really want to, now I'm so curious, what did you get your undergraduate degree in? Did you go a whole 4 years, or did you end up like being in pre-vet and then it's 3 years and then you go to vet school? How did that transpire?
Yeah, I did go the full 4 years, and actually a little extra because since I transferred, I lost some of my credits. So I had to redo a few things that didn't transfer over very well. But I actually got my undergrad. So when I was at Iowa, I was majoring in biology. And then when I came over to Iowa State, I majored in zoology. So it was very similar, but it definitely had more of a animal component. And one thing that's interesting, most people, so Iowa State has a very large production animal focus. And so most people that go to Iowa State for undergrad and go on to go to vet school major in animal science.
Animal science. Mm-hmm.
Getting
yeah,
more
Colorado
of that
State.
production animal medicine. I was far enough down my degree path by the time I transferred that I didn't entertain the idea of switching to that. But I have a lot of colleagues who majored in that at Iowa State. So it's always interesting to compare notes back and forth.
Oh yeah,
things we learn. So
I was at Colorado State University, and it's the same way.
Yeah.
And so many pre-vet students were animal science, and I'd look at the animal science courses and I would think, that is so interesting. But then I'd say, but what happens? What if I don't get into vet school? What kind of job is that going to give me? I don't know. I was trying to be practical.
Sure.
I feel like I missed out on a lot of useful stuff.
There's a practical component to it. And I just really liked the zoology degree. Really allowed me to dive into physiology and some of that kind of more ecological perspectives of things too. I think because I was in the LAS college, so it just helped me. Now I own a farm, so I kind of wish maybe I would have taken a few of those animal science classes. They would have been helpful.
Oh, and you know what's so interesting? I find that a lot of veterinarians who, I mean, at this time in their lives, you're kind of involved with so many things, but then personally have a farm. I just talked to Dr. Rachel Cesar Martinez. She has a farm, and it's interesting how this speaks to us, and we tend to be living in rural areas as veterinarians. Many who try to. There's not a lot of economic opportunity in rural areas or clinical practice, but it sounds like you've managed to make things work for you by associating yourself with the college. So let's go back one moment then to vet school when you got in. And then did you at that time do a double major when you were going through?
No, I didn't actually. So when I got into vet school, I still at that time really intended to go into small animal practice. I did work in some clinics over the summers and things like that to get some experience. And that was really my plan, despite all of my experience in human health. I think some of that is just, you don't always, even I wasn't really aware of the opportunities that were out there. And then as I was going through vet school, we take a public health course, as vet students do. That's usually part of your regular curriculum. And so I got a little more introduced to that idea of public health and how that opportunity does tie into our career. And it really interested me. So I kind of started exploring some things. I did a couple of internships and preceptorships during my senior year. I was close enough to entering clinics at the time that I really kind of declared my interest in public health that I didn't want to start my MPH while I was heading into clinics because I felt like I wouldn't be able to give it the focus I wanted to. And so I actually waited until I graduated from vet school to start my MPH. And so I graduated in May and I started my MPH that following June, And I did my MPH through the University of Minnesota. So we do have a dual degree program at Iowa State with the University of Iowa, where I had just come from, to do a DVM MPH. But again, I didn't follow that necessarily that route that most of my colleagues did that work in public health. However, Minnesota did allow me to transfer a lot of my credits in. And so it was very similar to how it would have operated had I still been in vet school, but just allowed me to be able to focus. And so then I practiced part-time at a clinic up in the Minneapolis area while I was going to school to finish up my master's in public health. And that was a good balance for me. I got some great experience doing clinical medicine that I definitely still used in my career. I knew that wasn't where I wanted to stay long term, but I learned some very valuable lessons and things that I still use to this day on a daily basis. So
yeah, and you know what, you bring up a good point right there. Many people that I've talked to for these interviews have said that they even though they knew they weren't going to stay in clinical practice, or perhaps it wasn't like really to the forefront at that moment, when they first got out of school, they did practice and they look back on that time as very valuable. So I think what I would say because of that at this point, after maybe 20 interviews, is that never discount the time you spend in clinical medicine. And somehow, some way, all of it comes to fruition and is going to be useful down the road, much like you don't discount that time you spent as a CNA in your teen years. So what year did you graduate from vet school? What was that time frame? I want to look at it in what's happening in the world.
Yeah, okay. 2011. And so the economy, we were still coming out of that recession then. And so it was a strange time. There really weren't the job availability that had been there when I went into vet school was not there anymore. And so it was, I wouldn't say, by any means impossible to find a job, but it was challenging, especially if you had a specific area you wanted to live in and you weren't real flexible about where you wanted to go. But I was able to find a practice opportunity, and but definitely it was different than it is now, for sure. So
right, and I think it's interesting to look at in the context of what's happening in the world to understand some of the driving forces. I'm working on my 40-year vet school reunion. I swear to God, it's so bizarre. And connecting with people that I graduated with 40 years ago, and it really 40 years. Someone said to me, "Oh, you've had such an interesting career." And I thought, "Oh, that's bizarre. I didn't plan it that way." And it was literally everything that drove me from one thing to the next. It was, "Oh, that door's opening. What am I gonna do? Yeah, what am I gonna do now?"
Yeah.
And it really, nothing was planned, I don't think, other than that first initial part of going into clinical practice. And then it just kind of unfolded. Did it happen that way for you?
Yeah, I would say definitely. I mean, the job that I have right now didn't even exist prior to COVID-19. So we can talk more about that later. But so because I work at Iowa State, I still have the opportunity. I'm not located out at the veterinary college anymore, but I still get to work with veterinary students frequently. And I advise the public health club out there. Whenever I'm talking to students, my biggest piece is just, be open, because if you would have told me that this is what I would be doing, even 5 years ago, I would have said, no way, that isn't even a thing, Yeah,
that's not even a thing. It's not like you went to the AVMA job board, or you're just, somehow on some Facebook group where they're talking about available jobs. So there you were, you got into clinical practice, and you were practicing for a while. When did things start to kind of occur to you, maybe I should kind of look elsewhere? And were you involved with like your local VMA or anything of that nature? Like, how did that transition occur? Tell me about
so
what was going
through. I've always been really active in our Iowa Vet Med Association, and even though I was living in Minnesota when I was doing my master's up there, but it was really my public health degree and some opportunities, again, not planned, but that came out of my practicum project is what really propelled my career into public health. And so when I was coming to the end of my MPH degree, we complete a practicum. Minnesota has some different options for how you do that. One of them is to write a federal grant. And so I had the opportunity to go back to the Iowa Department of Public Health. They were getting ready to write a grant for an FDA-funded rapid response team to be formed between the state agriculture, health department, and food inspection agencies to come together and have this food and feed emergency response team. So I ended up using that as my practicum project. So I was hired as an intern at the Iowa Department of Public Health. I was also working on outbreak response and doing some other things. But then ultimately we ended up being funded to be one of the rapid response teams. And I ended up being hired as a result of that. So my first job came as a direct result of an opportunity I had from doing my practicum project. And so I stayed on at the health department, and like things do, that position evolved, and I ended up becoming the foodborne epidemiologist in the health department and stayed on as the rapid response team coordinator. But it gave me experience in emergency management, emergency preparedness. I got trained in ICS. I was our planning section chief for foodborne outbreaks for the state. I did the surveillance for foodborne illnesses. I got trained in outbreak response. I was trained as a food inspector, so I got to go out and help conduct food inspections, and then for both retail and manufacturing facilities. So it really just was this incredible opportunity that I definitely didn't plan on doing, but I absolutely loved it. And while I was doing that on the weekends, I kept working in clinical practice just because I wanted to keep my feet wet, keep getting that experience. And that's how my whole career has gone. Just doors have opened. I've had these incredible opportunities, and I think having the courage to jump in and try things that, weren't really in your plan. I write my plans in pencil now, and I'm okay with that. So
That's awesome. Yeah, what a thought. I find it so interesting. So public health and food safety are so intertwined. I don't know that people understand when I say American Association Food Safety Public Health Veterinarians. They're kind of like, why are you using so many words?
Yeah.
And well, years ago, the two separate organizations combined into one. And that was several years ago. And so then I became president. I'm now past president, and Dr. Demery just took over. And it's incredible that here I'm listening to you and you're saying, yes, public health, and then I'm in charge of food safety. And that's where you learned how to do and go to establishments. So from incident command to food safety, that's very interesting. In some ways, I don't know that people can make the connection. Can you explain that a little more?
Yeah, sure. So in that role, they were, different. So we called it a joint appointment, but so I had this regulatory appointment, which is where the food inspection side came in. So that was through our food inspection agency. And so we would go into manufacturing facilities, we would go into restaurants. I primarily got involved when there was an issue, but I also was trained to go in and help, just with routine inspections as well. But really that safety component, because folks don't always, so a lot of like the bacteria that make people sick when they eat their foods, and norovirus and all those types of things. We have training on that in veterinary school, right? So we learn the virology, the microbiology, the food safety, the HACCP, so hazard analysis and critical control points. That's all a framework that veterinarians really have this expertise in, that they can go out and apply. And so then I had this added bonus that I was also had the appointment in the health department. And so I also got to come at it from more of that like epidemiological side, and that, bigger piece of doing case interviews. And so translating the knowledge of what we were seeing on the food inspection side. So we identified the problem, and then I got to follow it all the way through to the consumer, the person who may have actually gotten sick from eating the food. and translate that knowledge. So here's why you got sick, and here's what we're going to do to prevent anybody else from getting sick, and how we're going to handle this problem. So it really was a unique opportunity to kind of follow that whole process all the way through from the food coming out of the field or from the animal into where it was being processed to the person who's eating it. And then when we have issues on the other end, getting to follow it all the way through to that side too. So.
Yeah, and I find people don't at all understand, again, why veterinarians are involved with food safety. It's because we know all about the pathology when animals are sick.
Yep.
And somehow that doesn't connect for people, but it makes perfect sense when you put it into practice. So tell me about that time. There you were working for the university. Were you a teacher as well, or research,
Yeah,
or what was that like?
Well, so I was at the health department, and then I came to Iowa State in 2015, and I actually went back out into practice for a short time in there. I had another kind of unexpected opportunity come up. I also really enjoyed canine rehabilitation, and so I had an opportunity to come up to run a rehab area in a clinic the clinic I'd been working at part-time. So I went and did that, but quickly realized, I miss being in that public health world. And so again, another opportunity came up to go to Iowa State. And so that was when I entered academia. So in 2015, I came on board as a public health veterinarian with the Center for Food Security and Public Health, which is out of that college at Iowa State. Dr. Jim Roth runs that. And our focus was on lots of foreign animal disease preparedness, zoonotic disease education. So we developed a lot of online and then also print educational materials for vet students and veterinarians and even the general public about all those diseases, biosecurity, the food secure food supply plans. I got assigned to the National Veterinary Accreditation Program. So that was primarily what I worked on, although I did work
I saw that module.
Yeah, so then I got to start partnering with USDA and FDA and CDC and all these subject matter experts to write the modules that we take as accredited veterinarians. So everything from how to write a health certificate to our diseases and how we test for those, and we even wrote one on honeybees towards the end. So
yep, I like that one a lot.
Yeah,
that was very interesting. Did you find out about that job? Now, going back from clinical practice, that an opportunity came through. How did you find out about the job to get to Iowa State?
Yeah, so as oftentimes those things happen, was through a personal connection that I had. So and it was someone that I knew while I was in vet school, but the reason that I got to know that person better was through my involvement in our state veterinary medical association. So during this time, had become really active. I was an emerging leader liaison and part of our Power of 10 group. I'm now the president-elect for that organization, but I served on our board as a district director for a long time. And so that was how a lot of the connections and the opportunities I've had have come up from these relationships that I've gotten to know people through these organizations that I'm active in. So that one happened to come through someone I had made a connection with through our state vet med association. But even the food safety and public health veterinarian group, I've certainly had opportunities come up through, even not career opportunities necessarily, but just things to get involved in that you wouldn't even know existed without just getting involved in those things. They've been hugely beneficial to me. So
yeah, and I don't think it was so much a fact of just staying in the background in these different veterinary medical associations, because for years when I was in clinical practice, I would belong to different VMA levels, whether it be local, county, then up through state, and I found that for other types of opportunities, they may not have come through. But what you said just a moment ago really spoke to me. The fact that you were operating at that level where you were helping to run the organization in different ways, emerging leadership, and taking on those types of positions within committees or working groups, or being a liaison. all that time that you put in, people, in a way, they have the opportunity to see how you are acting and working. It's almost like an ongoing job interview, wouldn't you
Yeah,
say?
yeah,
In a
yeah.
way,
Yep.
really.
And I think the skills you gain from it, and you don't even realize sometimes while you're going through the process, but everything from through those organizations, I've had the opportunity to get involved in advocacy work, so I go to our state legislative day, and I'm now comfortable sitting down with legislators and having conversations with them about issues that affect our profession, and learning Robert's rules and how to run a meeting, the networking you get from just those relationships you form. And then I think it also just makes you very aware of all the different issues that impact our profession, and the work that goes on, through AVMA, and our House of Delegates at the AVMA, and the state level and the local level, and how each of those plays such an important role in protecting our profession and the work that we do, and also educating other people about why what we do is important and why it matters. So,
And it's not just clinical veterinary work that matters. It's
Yep.
all of these other involvements. So let's bring that up through the time when you were at Iowa State, and it seems like you have very different manifestations within the university where you've done different types of jobs and so forth. How did those occur?
Yeah, so and I did do some teaching as well. So while I was at the Center for Food Security and Public Health, we actually we had a faculty member that was involved in an accident the weekend before school was supposed to start in the fall, and they needed someone to come down and help with the shelter medicine course and some surgical principles course. And also somebody to help with the rehab department. And so my work at CFSBH, we had some flexibility in our hours and things like that allowed me to go down and do some of that part-time, which again was a huge learning opportunity, totally unplanned. It was temporary, but I certainly made connections and learned a lot of things doing that too. And then I shortly after that applied for an opportunity. Iowa State was chosen as the host for the National Institute, this is a mouthful, of Antimicrobial Resistance Research and Education, or NIAMRE, which is really a global but national institute dedicated to AMR that is housed at Iowa State, and Dr. Paul Plummer is the director for that. And I did actually, so I left CFSBH for a time and went and served as the associate director over at NIAMRE. So I was still an Iowa State employee, but acting in a completely different role. And in that job, we did tons of political advocacy. It was a new institute, so I got a lot of experience in strategic planning, forming relationships with stakeholders, both public and private. We were building this thing from the ground up. So tons of experience doing things. And then of course, media interviews, serving as a subject matter expert on AMR. I spent a lot of time in DC on the Hill, doing advocacy work about AMR. And then COVID happened. So, so I did that, and then COVID happened. And in the midst of all of that, basically, I ended up being asked to come over to main campus and at Iowa State still and serve as our university, or our acting COVID-19 public health coordinator was my technical role. It really was only supposed to be for a semester, and it was supposed to be focused primarily on administering. We have a very small local public health department in our county, and they were completely, as a lot of folks were, not resourced to respond to something like that. So we kind of set up our own little miniature public health infrastructure on our campus. So we did our own contact tracing, case investigation, all of that. And so that was primarily what the role is envisioned to be, but it really, as things do, turned into a lot more than that. And so we ended up building really our own basically little miniature public health department. So we had a public health plan that we followed. Like I said, we did all the case investigation, contact tracing, all of that in-house. Once the vaccinations were available, we, implemented those and administered those to our faculty, staff, and students. Iowa State has 30,000 students, so we're a relatively large institution. And, I became one of the folks who was frequently talking to the media again about stuff like that. And that was in a completely different environment than it had been for AMR, I would say. But it was kind of putting everything that my career had been building up to that point really into practice in this environment where, like, wow, we're living this thing that we've been talking about could happen for so long, and now it's happening. It's a new disease, we're learning about it, and then as everything continued to progress, it really was just an opportunity to really put everything I had learned into practice. And that's where those relationships became so important. So all those relationships that had been built over the years, when you go through something like that, you really depend on, not just your local relationships, but your regional, state, and national relationships too, to help you do the best that you can in the role that you're serving in. So I got connected to a ton of people across campus I'd never worked with before. And it was a huge learning experience, very challenging, but very rewarding too.
So what did that turn into for now?
Yeah, so it turned into, I adopted my son in the middle of all that too. So I was gone for a little while, and then when I came back to work,
sure, why not?
That was in the fall of 2021. I did go back to my regular job. So I had been away doing COVID full time for almost a year and a half at that point. I did go back to my regular job for just a short time out at the veterinary college. And then the university ended up opening up a position for the university public health coordinator. And so I applied for that, and I moved into that role a little over a year ago. And so that's what I'm doing now. So, and again, as I said, this role would not have existed if it weren't for COVID-19. So that certainly is not all that I do now. I do a lot more than that, but that mindset, and that, I think it really obviously brought public health to the forefront for a whole lot of people that had never had to think about public health before, but the value that we bring and what that could bring to our university was seen by our senior leaders. And so they created this position. And so now my position, I certainly still do a lot with infectious disease. So COVID-19, we still, monitor that actively. Monkeypox or MPOX, that outbreak, was something we dealt with earlier, about a year ago. And then, we keep an eye on measles. We have a global community because we're at a university. So we keep an eye on things like the Ebola outbreaks and Marburg virus and things that are going on in the world that could potentially impact our campus, our students who are studying abroad. I work really closely with our student health center, our local physicians as well. We partner with them closely. We have a public health team set up still that we function not the same as we did with COVID, but still have that infrastructure. And then I still have an emergency management component to my job. So for example, right now I'm leading the development of our public health emergency response plan. We're really revising that based on lessons learned from COVID-19. So that, again, that ICS training came into practice hugely for that. And then I have a health promotion component to my role now too. So I do a lot of data management for some of our campus community health needs assessments that we do, looking at our students' health and well-being needs and the programs that we offer at Iowa State and how we respond to those needs. So that's a little new piece that I haven't done before.
Really, yeah. And I think it's interesting if we ponder for a moment, we all were looking at, COVID's come in and back in 2020, and we were sitting there thinking, okay, so this probably is not going to be all that long. But it grew to be such a long period of time that you, as you said, developed an infrastructure. As that came to, I guess I should say, came out of being an emergency state, since we felt like we were in emergency for a year and then maybe another year. at that point, it seems to me everyone in a way came to a realization of, that it's more than COVID. We have this infrastructure in place.
Mhm.
We see other things rising up. They could potentially be a problem. Let's keep what we have, make it stronger, not dismantle it. And then, as you said, now it's a permanent position. And so, and it's expanding and becoming more useful. Now you've expanded it to the students in general, as you said,
Mhm.
their general
Mhm.
well-being. So it seems to me like at this point, you can be incredibly busy because now you're seeing so many ways that this particular position can be applied. Is that pretty much what
Yeah,
you're
yep, absolutely. I would say that. And, because again, those relationships are so important. At any given time, if something like COVID were to happen again, we learned so much about that infrastructure and who we needed at the table and what we needed to do to operate successfully, that we can pull those people back in. So we try to keep those relationships going. They don't look quite the same as they did 2 years ago, but you need communication folks. You need people who can do statistical analysis. You need folks who can, there's all these little pieces in. So keeping those relationships is really important. So, and I think,
did you
oh,
go
sorry,
ahead?
it's really helped our community in general. We still meet regularly, monthly and now quarterly, but the healthcare providers in our county and Iowa State, our public health team representatives, we still meet regularly. And those are things that never existed prior to COVID. Those relationships were there, but that regular exchange of information and kind of keeping everybody, on top of what's happening and what's impacting our populations is so important. And so it's been really neat to see those things carry forward.
Right, and it sounds like they also fully rely on what the university brings to the table as well.
Yeah.
Did you find any kind of perhaps counterparts at other universities that you were able to tap into or network with, or
Yeah,
something of that nature?
I'm not aware of any other universities that have a position exactly like mine that has been made permanent, but during COVID, there definitely were point people or people who were acting in a similar role to mine at other institutions. One of whom I actually knew from my MPH when I did my MPH at University of Minnesota, who was another veterinarian. So we would definitely connect and say, what are you doing that's working? Or we're really struggling with this. Do you have any thoughts on, what are you doing that might be able to help us do better? That sharing of ideas, especially when you're in a time like that where you're really navigating the unknown. We didn't know a lot about COVID when it first started. And so being able to reach out and get other people's expertise is very helpful. So.
Do you see this as a position that you would be staying in going forward? And I got to tell you, this is a funny question for me to ask because I've talked to so many people who are looking back on their careers. I feel like you're in the middle and you're looking
Yeah.
forward.
Yeah.
And I also feel though like the university itself has been a permanent place in your life that's provided a great deal of security, and even though it's manifested in different roles for yourself. Would you say that's pretty
Yeah,
much the
yeah,
case?
definitely. I mean, I have being an alum and an employee now, I have a huge connection to Iowa State. So it feels like home to me. I love my current position, and I can't say that I've ever been in a job where I was like, ooh, this is not, this is not serving me well. I've always felt like I have learned things from the positions that I've been in. So certainly I have plans to stay in this role. I always, though I'm not afraid to jump into the next opportunity. I think it's what's gotten me to where I am so far. And I always think there's things to be learned, relationships to be built, new skills to master. And so, yeah, I guess as I said, I write my plans in pencil and keep an open mind and just try to keep learning. I love to learn. So
Oh yeah,
hopefully my
yes.
career has offered me a lot of opportunities to do that. So.
And this is interesting during a time when veterinarians quite often they're saying, well, what's going to give me some kind of stability going forward in terms of maybe retirement, or how do I build that kind of financial stability? And because many, I'm from the generation of veterinarians who were in private practice a lot of the time, and the ones who got perhaps a real great stability went into the military, or in government work, again, another way of the military, and government military, and then they got that kind of stability. But now it's in clinical medicine. Oh, perhaps they have to look at corporate, to get stability.
Sure.
So it's very difficult, I think, for veterinarians to stop for a moment and say, what can I do to perhaps, dig myself out of a hole of debt, because of student loans and so forth. Is there anything you can talk about regarding that?
Yeah, so certainly I've spent the majority of my career in public service. So I was with the government and now with a public university. So I'm a public service loan forgiveness. I am less than a year away from finishing that process. So I think there's trade-offs there, and people need to be very informed about what they're getting into. When you take a public service role, your upfront salary is probably not as lucrative as being out in the private industry. However, health insurance benefits, retirement, all those types of things, there really is a balance there. And for me, that's been, I think, worth it. So while I know I've probably taken a cut in salary over the years from the jobs that I've had, another thing, a lot of my positions were grant funded. And so you're living with that kind of uneasiness of, ooh, are they going to renew this funding next year? Am I going to have a job? I've certainly been in a position like that too, where I didn't know if I was going to have a job in a few months. So that is a scary place to be, and one that you have to figure out. But not all public service jobs are like that either. So I think you just have to go in informed, know what the trade-offs are, know what you feel comfortable with. But there's certainly, I think, working in public service, some of those health insurance and retirement benefits, they pay off hugely. And if you keep advancing, you can get to a point where the salary is comparable as well, I think.
Yeah, and I'm so glad that you were able to articulate this, because I know that for me, with my students loan, when I looked back and they talked about public, it's like I don't even know what I can do for that. And then if you talk to them, at the student loan, they'd be like, oh no, that doesn't apply, or no, you can't possibly. They're all about no and not any way of enabling. So it behooves a person not necessarily to believe what's being said to them on the phone, and to seek help elsewhere, and then also to know that they don't necessarily have to be in government work in order to get that loan forgiveness, or be a teacher, or it's so interesting. There's been many times where I've seen it's just these things that you can do. That's it. So I know people who went into, as an example, USDA FSIS, and they thought, okay, I just got to ride out 10 years and be able to do this. And when no, they can be, going into some other level with, as you said, the university. And that's
public institutions, nonprofits. There really is a lot of options. You do definitely want to do your homework and make sure you're doing that paperwork every year, so that they, are saying like, yep, you do qualify. But yeah, there's so much more than it looks up front. So,
but at the end, it's worth it, because you're sitting down now and you're able to say, well, because number one, you have that continuity of work at a particular institution, even though it's paying less, it over time, that continuity of that income, that particular income, it builds up because it's consistent. And then you have the benefits, which so many of us have had to struggle to have throughout our lives. And medical is a big one, of course. And then going on and having different types of retirement points. I spoke with a friend of mine who is right now a state veterinarian, and she said she finally got to know that she's finally vested in her retirement points from having worked at different government agencies as a state vet, and I'm in as a federal veterinarian, and all of those combined. So it's really interesting to see that you have that opportunity too. Again, it's not just about socking money away in a 401k per se. It is there's other ways that you can have that stability further down when you're looking at an actual retirement. So I want to take just a couple of minutes and ask you to talk about where you are now in terms of your different VMA activities, because
Yeah.
I know you work within. Oh, one more thing before I forget though. When did you finally decide to sit for the boards, and what?
I did that in 2017 is when I did that. So, and I had a lot, I was very lucky. And that was when I was working at the Center for Food Security and Public Health. We had a lot of support to go through that process when we were working there. So I had a colleague that had just done it the year prior. I had another colleague that did it the year after me. And so we had a lot of support to go through that process. And I'm very, very glad that I did that. So,
Yeah,
and that's, I did not, that didn't qualify me for any salary gains at the university per se. It does in the government. So depending on where you work, it can equate to you making more money. But certainly, again, relationships I build, I'm involved in that college. I'm not actively serving on boards or committees with them, but right now, you know, and that's again, a learning process, and just, it's something that I'm very glad that I did.
So why don't you specify exactly that degree and how you attained it? Because we haven't really talked about that at all yet.
Yeah. So I sat through for the American College of Veterinary Preventive Medicine boards, and I believe they do them online now. When I sat through them, we did them in person, but it's not a traditional residency, so it suited my career well because it can be based on your experience. And so they require a certain amount of experience in certain areas. So you have to justify that you've done that. And then you sit for an exam. So there's multiple choice and essay questions. And then when you're done, you can become certified. And it's one of the recognized board specialties within veterinary medicine. So yeah, I'm very glad that I went through that process. So, and University of Minnesota has a residency program that's a little more traditional type way of going about getting ready to sit for that exam, but you also can just do it based on experience. So for a lot of people who've worked in the public health field and veterinary medicine in particular, it suits us really well because a lot of us qualify based on the experience that we've had. So.
And I know that was true in the military, and they are requiring it for active duty.
Okay.
Absolutely. Through it's penciled in during the career, it's like a career cycle that they have it all written out. And for any of us who served as reservist, it was highly recommended within a couple of years that of that time when they had said, oh, you know, we want everybody to have this.
Yeah.
So it is very well recognized and respected. So thank you for explaining that. So now, yes, tell me about your activities within VMAs, which is it's extensive. I know that as well.
Yeah. So
that's it for you.
Yeah. So I previously served. Our Power of 10 leadership group in Iowa is really strong. So that's kind of a group where they take some recent graduates and introduce you to organized veterinary medicine. I went through that program. A lot of us in our state go on to serve on our executive board and take on other officer positions. I was one of those people. So I went on and served on our executive board for, I'm not actually sure how many years, several years. And then 2 years ago, was asked if I would be interested in being nominated for vice president. So in our state VMA, it's a 4-year term. So you do vice president, president-elect, president, and then immediate past president. So you kind of move through those years of service. And so I said yes. So I'm currently in my president-elect year. And then in September, I'll transition over to president of the Iowa VMA. So it's been, again, a great experience. Similar, you know, I'm still going to board meetings, just in a different role now. But am involved in our legislative committee or budget committee. So you really get to see the detailed ins and outs of your state VMA in a more detailed way than you do in some of those other roles. And then I also serve as our public health committee chair. And I've done that for, I think, since 2016 or 17. And so that's been a lot of fun too. So we have, it ranges how many people we have on there, but we have people from general practice, people who work for the government, people who work in academia. Our state veterinarian or a representative is on there. Folks who work in some of the industry organizations. And so we come together twice a year and just discuss public health issues and what's happening and what's impacting us. And it's great to hear all the different perspectives just within our own state. And then we help plan some of the continuing education at our meetings that we have at our winter conference, and then write newsletter articles that go out to our membership every month. So, and then the Food Safety and Public Health Veterinarians Group, I serve as our delegate to the House of Delegates at the AVMA. So that I absolutely love doing. So tons of experience with, man, we cover a ton of issues at the AVMA House of Delegates. So everything from cat decline to, feral, we had a big discussion on feral cat populations one year, but we also talk about raw milk and, just a wide variety of topics.
Raw pet food.
Yep, pet food, really enjoyed being involved in that, and serve on our board for the AAFSPHV as well. And then I'm a beekeeper on the side. I kind of just started that as a hobby, but now that's kind of bled into my career as well. So I'm the president of the Honeybee Veterinary Consortium this year as well. So and we're a group of not just veterinarians, but a lot of us are veterinarians. We do a lot of education work as well to try to train veterinarians in honeybee medicine now that we're being asked to go out and diagnose hives and stuff with the changes in the VFD rule. So we do a lot more than that too, but that's kind of the short and narrow. So
yes, and so your farm is that a business per se, or what? Okay.
Yeah, yep, it is a business. So I sell honey.
You're an entrepreneur.
Yeah. I sell honey, and I have poultry, so I sell eggs, like just in-shell eggs. And then I have fiber animals as well. So I also own a charitable sock company that I bought right before COVID started, from a fellow Iowa State alum, who she makes socks, and then the profits go to fight hunger. And so now I purchased that organization as well, but I use the fiber from the animals on my farm to make the socks. So yeah, so that keeps me very busy in my free time.
But all of it sounds like it's so much fun.
Yeah, I really do enjoy it. I think, as a lot of us do, I just love being in the presence of animals. And so that's how I start and end every day. And it's my kind of relaxation, I guess. It's hard work, but it's physical work. You don't have to think super hard. So that's kind of my
yeah, well, I find I don't have to ever go to the gym because my property and horses and gardening and getting the property ready for events, it keeps me so busy and tired at the end of the day, particularly when the weather becomes nicer and I could be outside more.
Yep.
So it's real good for you, health wise, physically, in addition. So looking at your involvement with the local VMA, I'm just curious, do you have clinical veterinarians coming up to you and talking to you about alternative careers?
I would say yes, not probably, and I'm not sure that it's always in that venue, but yeah, I will often get asked. I think particularly, I know a lot of my colleagues that are out in clinical practice, they are feeling burned out and exhausted. And, I often have people ask me kind of, how did you end up doing what you do? Or what do you think of it? And Yeah, so I'm always happy to share. I do think that is one of the huge benefits of my career path has been that I've been able to have a little more work-life balance and less of that on-call type of lifestyle because of the nature of the jobs that I've had. Certainly that doesn't mean like during COVID, I was, just like everybody else was working a ton. But it does give you an opportunity for a little more balance. A lot of times I think I just always, so many of my career opportunities were not planned. And so it's just that ability to kind of think creatively about how your skill set can be used. Even if you don't want to completely leave clinical practice, there's a lot of opportunities out there too. Even if you edit a journal or want to contribute articles to a newsletter or something, there's, even little things people can do to try to gain some, enjoyment back maybe, or just something new, a new twist in their job.
Yeah, I
That can
find
help
that
them.
if you volunteer, and
Mhm.
believe me, your different levels of VMA need you. If you
Yes.
volunteer, you gain that satisfaction. I believe volunteering gives you an element of control
Mhm.
that
Yeah.
that you don't get in other things like having a business or working a job. So many times we feel like we're being buffeted by whatever
Mhm.
activities are going around, around you. But when you're volunteering, it gives you that ability to perhaps, I look at it like setting up a project that you're working on, whether it be
Mhm.
contributing, like you said, to a newsletter. So you're setting up your project, your article, and you're working on it, and you have that control to put in the time and effort that you
Mhm.
want to do. And then when you're done, you have the finished project. So there's the tangible result, and you can gain that satisfaction.
Yeah.
So in my experience, anytime that I've volunteered, I've felt it was very uplifting. And so I have enjoyed it. And so at this point, then, what would you give as advice to fellow veterinarians who are perhaps at a crossroads?
Yeah. I would say I think sometimes it's really easy, particularly if you're feeling burned out. I mean, that's easy to get to that point in our profession. I've been there myself too. I think one of the most amazing things about having a veterinary degree, and I truly think our degree is unique in this way, is that it can be used in so many different ways. And we have a skill set that is I look at it as a toolbox, I guess. It's that we can apply that in so many different situations in so many different ways. It really makes us marketable in a way that a lot of other professions don't have. And so I just encourage people to try to, think outside the box. What do you really enjoy doing, or what would give you maybe that element of feeling like you have a little more control, or something that's different from what you're doing in your everyday life? And even if it's just one small thing, how can you incorporate that into what you're already doing, just to bring you a little more, even if it's just a sense of novelty or trying something new. It can be really rewarding. And I think our degrees set us up for success when it comes to things like that. We don't run out of options. So and
Yeah,
I usually am telling that to students, but just like I always tell them, if you get out there in your first job and you're like, wow, what was I thinking? I don't really like this. I don't really want to be a
mhm,
veterinarian. I always encourage, like, don't give up in the profession, because there's so many things that we can do. So
mhm.
and so many people willing to help you get there too. So reach out to folks, make connections, and yeah.
Yeah, and I love that you did say that. Reach out to folks. So if you are perhaps in a situation where you're thinking about some types of alternatives, and you are interested in perhaps something that Dr. Clark has mentioned today, uh, she would be available to have that conversation. Do you like to get perhaps maybe reached out by LinkedIn or email or
Yeah,
what?
email is totally fine. LinkedIn is totally fine too. Yep. And I'm always happy to chat with whomever. Yep. I benefit from those things hugely too. So I always enjoy talking with other people, and learning about people's experiences. So.
Yeah, and we do have a sponsoring situation available within our Food Safety Public Health Veterinary Association, where we do particularly mentor, and so we do encourage even clinical practitioners to join us, because as you just finished saying for an hour, that veterinary medicine is public health, and clinical medicine counts. You're sometimes on the foreground of an impact of something that's going to affect the population.
Yep, absolutely,
right?
Absolutely, yep.
Yeah, and so it does count. So I encourage clinical veterinarians to look at our organization. We're very welcoming. You don't have to have a job that is specifically food safety or public health as a name in its title. It can be that you are a veterinarian. That's really all it takes, is just be a veterinarian. And likewise myself, I'm available. If people want to talk to me, I might be a little bit more available than Kristen is, because I am theoretically retired, but I've been sort of retired for a couple of years, but I am opening another couple of businesses. And so that's just it. In veterinary medicine, you do have so many opportunities, and being an entrepreneur and making your own path is completely acceptable. So while Dr. Clark was able to do that within the university system, you can do that out in the business world, and it does not necessarily have to be just regular clinical medicine, right?
Yep, absolutely. Yep.
I've seen a number of people who've translated whatever job they had into a business, and so at this point, I think the most important thing is that we encourage everyone to share these videos that I'm doing. I have them on YouTube, so you can actually watch if you like to do that. I enjoy going on YouTube and just watching stuff, but I've taken these and put them onto podcasts as well, and so you can listen. And so they are all under the channel name of American Association Food Safety Public Health Veterinarians. I'll post the podcast in the show notes, and also Dr. Clark's bio and contact ways of getting a hold of her and so on. So and I can't thank you enough for taking the time. So many of the, as I call them, younger veterinarians, they're like, well, what do I have to say? What have I done? And I'm like, come on, please. You're the demographic that I really am talking to, the ones who are doing things right now versus stepping back. And we're saying from the 40 years,
Yeah.
I swear it's 40 years this year for me, that we have been veterinarians, and this is where we've been. No, you guys are making it all happen now, and we believe in you, and we want to support you. And thank you so much, Kristen, for being part of that.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It was fun.
So like, share this video, and subscribe. Bye all for now.
Bye.